Hello everybody and welcome to Wesley's Plant World with me, Wesley Peterson, and today I have a video all about this beautiful plant that I have in front of me here. This is my beautiful Aloe barbadensis Miller, and this is a very common cultivar of the aloe vera plant. So nearly everybody who likes plants has experienced an aloe vera at some point in their plant journey because they are just beautiful plants and very easy to keep. Now, they have succulent leaves full of moisture. We know they're good for us. We can use them for all sorts of medical treatment, and you've heard that if you cut yourself on your hand or so forth, you can cut off a leaf and rub the sap inside onto your hand and it will help to heal it. And these can also be eaten and be used in many different ways, but they are also beautiful just as a house plant in your home, and in many places in the world where it's much warmer, they grow outside everywhere quite prolifically. Where I am in Sweden, this is only a house plant, this variety, because it can't take cold temperatures at all. It would absolutely die in frost or anything that's way too low. So keeping this plant indoors in a normal home environment is quite easy. This plant is also easy to keep because it doesn't dry out in the home environment where you have your radiators or some kind of heating equipment that dries out the air. These plants cope quite well with a dry environment, so they don't have to have a lot of high humidity around them to keep them happy. Another thing that makes them very easy to keep. Another thing that's quite easy is that, well, they like bright light. So you can put them in the window where they're getting bright direct light, as long as it's not too burning hot behind the glass, because then you will get burning marks on the leaves as you would with any other plant, unless it is used to being in that kind of harsh environment from very young, or it's been slowly acclimatized to that situation. Otherwise, the best situation for this plant is to keep it in a bright, indirect position all the time, and it will grow out very happily. If it's in an area where it's too dark, it's going to get long, thin and straggly, and you'll see that it is desperate to find the light. I have this plant actually right on the top of my shelf behind here, and I have grow lights in the shelf, and I have one above with the pinky glow, and that is what's helping this plant. And during the day in the summertime, I do get some of the filtration of the sunshine coming through, and it's been enough to support this plant. Although to me this one looks like it's got very long leggy leaves. I actually quite like the look of this. It's looking very Medusa like, isn't it? I do quite like that look, and because I have it quite high up and its leaves are growing out, they're pressing against the wall and the ceiling and giving these effects, well, as I said, Medusa, and I really do like that. But now I have to get in and change this plant up a bit because it's got leggy in its base, and I'll show you that in a minute, and it's starting to flop over. So it needs to be repotted so that I can get it supported in the pot to keep it upright again. But otherwise, the plant is growing out a lot of new leaves and it's looking very happy as it is. So when it comes to soil in this plant, you're going to need to keep it in a sandy kind of soil. So you could get a gardening mix yourself and mix that with some fine sand. You can also use lacquer balls, you can also use perlite. You just need to mix the soil with something like gravel, for example, to make sure that the soil is aerating. This plant likes air around its roots. It comes from areas on rocky and sandy hillsides and plateaus where it comes from originally, so it needs to be kept in that kind of soil. And you can go out and find yourself a cactus mix and have everything ready made, but often I find that cactus mix doesn't have quite enough sand, so you might need to add a little bit more anyway, just to make sure that it is very loose flowing sand to keep the roots happy around this plant. Now, even though this plant is a succulent and it holds a lot of moisture in its leaves, it does like regular watering, but it would never survive if it's sitting in water or it's in a soggy soil. It will just rot out straight away in its roots. By regular watering, I just mean that it needs to be watered and then it needs to be allowed to dry out completely before you water it again, and then water it through, let it dry out completely, and then your plant will stay happy and healthy, and it will produce more leaves and fresh, healthy looking green leaves if you keep doing that. So if you leave it too long without watering, well, its roots are going to dry out, they're going to become brittle, and the plant will have a harder time of taking up water when you water it, and then you could have a situation where it rots out quite easily. So regular watering, but definitely not overdoing it. And it needs to be watering again with a combination of bright light to keep this plant happy. If you start seeing any kind of brown tips on your plant, you can go and prune those off, no problem. The plant won't have any problem with you doing that. It will seal over itself. And my plant at the moment doesn't have any browning tips, so I'm really pleased to see that. It means it's happy, healthy, and it's getting enough moisture. If you get any leaves that are starting to brown off, dry out, or rotted off or anything like that around the base and so forth, just prune those off. Just pull them right off and you'll be fine. The stalk will be fine on the plant. That way you will encourage the plant to produce new leaves from the top part of the plant. And in soil, your plant will also grow out more pups around the edge. And that's where we get into the propagation part of this plant. This plant is propagated through its pups. They do produce a lot of pups around the base. And then when these small plants come out, you can just take one of those off and repot it in a new plant as you wish. Or you can let the plants grow out as a lovely mass together in a pot, and it looks absolutely beautiful that way as well. So that is a way of propagating the plant. Now this plant in the wild comes from areas where it gets a low amount of nutrients, so it's not that important to go and fertilize this plant. So definitely do not go in and start over fertilizing it, because you will actually kill the plant. Once a year, maybe in the growing season, you can give this plant a slight amount of fertilizer, but really don't overdo it. It doesn't need it at all. And when it comes to repotting this plant in a soil-based situation, the plant doesn't get deep roots. So you wouldn't want to go and get your plant from a container, maybe like this one, and then get soil and start planting it in a pot as high as this one I have here. No, this plant gets shallow roots that get wider and spread out close to the surface of the soil, because it would need to be able to get as much moisture as possible in its natural environment. So it stays around the top part of the soil. So when repotting, you'd go wider to give more space for the roots, and also to give more space for the pups to grow out around the mother plant. So keep that in mind when you're repotting your plant. So when it comes to pests on this plant can get mealybugs, it can get aloe mites, and it could get aloe scale. So you need to keep an eye on that. You could get some kind of preventative to spray on your plant to keep these at bay. You will wash over your plant with some water, and then you can spray it off with, I use, for example, in my situations with my plants, neem oil mixed with dishwashing liquid and water, and then I spray that over, and then you can wipe off the leaves, and you will be able to get most of those kind of pests off your plant. But these plants in a home environment aren't that often going to get any pests on them. I've had this plant now for 3 years, maybe more than 3 years, and I've done a video where I actually showed where I bought this plant. It was much smaller than this, and well, I've had no pests on this plant in all of that time. And I did another video a while later where I had this plant on the side, and you can see how much it grew, and it was in soil, and it's very happy. Never had any pests on this plant, so it's done very well for me indoors. But I suspect that if you have this plant growing in areas where there are a lot of them and they grow naturally outside in gardens and so forth, that pests can easily spread. So you just need to find out what kind of preventative you have where you live that you can spray on the leaves or wipe down the leaves to help keep those pests at bay. Now, I'm saying that this plant was in soil because in fact I've done something that, well, I wanted to experiment. I didn't know if this was going to work at all with this kind of plant, but in fact it has. If I lift up this plant now, you're going to understand exactly what I mean. You can hear liquid, and you can see my plant is in a plastic pot, and in the pot it has holes up and down the sides, and the whole plant is living in this cachet pot here, full of nutrient mix, which means the plant is living 100% of the time in water, which goes against everything we think about when we think about aloe veras not wanting to be waterlogged with their roots in water. Well, I transferred this plant into a semi-hydroponic setup because I wanted to see if this would work, because I've done it with many other succulent plants and it's worked very well. It works very well, I found, because if you keep the nutrient mix to around 1/3 to 1/2 of the container and the rest of the roots outside of the water mix in the material that you're keeping them in to support the plant, well then the roots are getting plenty of air, the plant is getting a regular supply of water, and then it thrives that way. And this plant is doing the same. The only problem it has, as I said before, is that it's legging out in the bottom, and I'm going to show that, as I said, in a moment. But this plant has been living in a semi-hydroponic setup now for around a year or so, and it's been doing absolutely fine. My plant is as green as day, and the only thing that's happened is that it's had a few leaves around the bottom, and I'm keeping my plant in leckables. Around the bottom, those leaves have browned off or rotted away, and the rest of the plant is absolutely fine. So the semi-hydroponic setup basically is that you have a nutrient mix in your cachet pot. You have your plant in a separate plastic container or whatever with holes, and then you have a medium, and here my leckables, which are clay balls around where all the roots can grow, and you keep the reservoir of nutrient mix filled up in the container so that the plant can decide how much it wants to take up, because it's not going to be submerged in water completely. So some of the roots, as I said, will be outside of the water and some will be inside. And the plant gets everything it needs in a constant and steady flow. And it even works with succulents or plants that you would really believe need to dry out in between. And this is perfect proof of that. A plant I've had for 3 years, changed up from soil, put into semi-hydroponics, been in this situation a year, and it's doing absolutely fine. So let me bring it closer to the camera now so you can see what's happening with the plant. So here's my beautiful Aloe barbadensis Miller. Look how lovely those leaves are looking at the front. Swirling and beautiful, long and green and lush, and well, my plant I think looks absolutely perfect. And then we'll look down at the bottom at the pot situation, and you can see my plant is in a plastic pot full of leckables only. And at the moment I appreciate you can't see any roots, but I will be taking this plant up in a minute, so you'll see everything in a moment. But you can see here my plant has got a little bit leggy, and you can see that's causing it to lean over on the edge of the pot. So I need to get this sorted out. But this is how my beautiful plant is living. Look at that, it just looks absolutely beautiful. So now that I've shown you that, I just want to get on with organising my plant into its new semi-hydroponic setup. So to do that, I need to get the old cachet pot out of the way, and I need to get my plant out of the leckables, and then I'll be able to show the roots a little bit closer, because I have a new shorter pot that's wider and fresh new leckables. And remember, whenever you take leckables out of a plant, you can reuse them. Just boil them to make sure there's no viruses or bacteria or anything like that, fungi growing in them, and then you'll be ready to go and use them for another plant. So you don't need to throw them away. Reuse your leckables and save yourself some money. So you can do that. Right, so I'm just going to put this to the side, get the plant out of the leckables, and then we can look at, I don't need that container now, we can look at how the roots are looking. Oh, leckables going everywhere. And before I replant this plant, I do actually want to go and rinse its roots out, because if there's any organic material lying around, I can get rid of that now to give me a good fighting chance of this plant carrying on happily in its new setup. And any roots that slough off, I can take off at the same time. So let's have a look at this close up before I carry on. So here you go, you can see the roots. Look how white and healthy they're looking, despite growing in a nutrient mix, meaning that those parts are down in the water and the plant is still absolutely happy. But here at the top, you can see there's a lot of organic material lying around there. I just want to wash that off to keep this plant on the safe side so it doesn't rot out or anything like that. But apart from that, the roots are looking so good that I know this plant is happy. And that is despite what looks like loose organic material around the base of the plant here. that is all just to be tidied up, and this plant will carry on in its new pot as happy as day. So there we go. I've rinsed off my plant some more. It's looking much cleaner down the bottom here. A lot of the roots are sloughed off. It's still got roots going on, and that doesn't matter. This plant will figure it out itself. It's a succulent. It will be okay as long as I put it up in an area of the container where it's not laying in a lot of moisture now. Then it can grow out new roots that will go down to the bottom into the nutrient mix itself, and that way I don't have to worry about it rotting out around the base. So this area should not be under the nutrient mix at all, just the lower roots, and you'll be absolutely fine. And see here, one of the roots has grown in and through a leca ball, which is quite fun. So now this plant is ready to be repotted up in its semi-hydroponic setup, and I have fresh new leca balls, so we'll just put my container, the old container, to the side. I have my new cachet pot here, and I have my fresh leca balls here, which I'm going to have to tip into the container I have next to me, some of them, and figure out the height. I need the pot to support my aloe vera as well, so I want 1/3 leca balls. So my plant is 1/3 of the way up in the container, and now I'm just going to fill up all the way around the edges with leca balls to support my plant up in position. You just have to take your time and take a few leca balls at a time. Place them in while holding your plant up in place, and see how you get on. And you can push them around with your fingers as you go, right? We're getting there, except I just threw 1,000 on the floor. Well, not that many. So now my aloe vera has been replanted up in a slightly thicker container. Now I don't know which of these cachet pots I want to put it in to support it, because it still can't support itself. It hasn't got that many roots and support. So first of all I was thinking this one, but if I put it in there it's not going to get enough support, where this one is slightly taller and would be able to support the plant maybe more. Or I might just have to accept that my plant looks like that. Let's have a look. If I put it in here, in this container, my plant is top heavy and it's going to lean forward. I'm actually going to have to get a support for this plant because I don't want it to fall out of its leca balls and I don't want it to snap. But I think it looks better in the slightly larger cachet pot because that hides the base part of the plant when I actually like the leaves more anyway. So that would do, and then also I'll be able to easily see how much nutrient mix I have at the bottom. So what is going to be my solution to hold this plant up? Well, I don't have any plastic rods at the moment, so I've decided to get myself a crystal rock, and I'll be able to place that in under my plant on top of the leca balls to support my plant. And that is a good start. And if I lift it up, you can see, and I'm doing this because I have leca balls that have fallen down into the bottom of the pot in the way. Just need to put it back in the pot. I can put my plant back in here. And there we go. And then I can place this rock in where I need it to support the whole plant, which is here. And there I have it. So now my plant, which is going to be on top of the shelf and won't be touched anyway, is going to be supported like this until the plant grows out a few more roots to keep it in place. So I'm really, really pleased with how this has worked out. And now all I'm going to do is put 2 centimeters of the nutrient mix right down in the bottom of the pot so that I know most of the root area, the root ball, is up out of the nutrient mix in the moist leckables for now, and they'll have a chance to dry out and give the roots time to reorganize themselves and grow down into the nutrient mix. So, nutrient mix in the bottom. See, a little bit more. This cachet pot is really good. It's actually a pot I got from IKEA and it's called Muscot. M-U-S-K-O-T, if you're interested. They have an inner lip. Let me show you here. So if you look in here on the edge, you can see this inner rim. This is perfect as a marker of where you should keep your nutrient mix to. So that is 1/3 of the way up. So if I look, it's here. And then the rest is outside of the nutrient mix, giving your root ball plenty of space for oxygen. So it's a perfect pot for using as a semi-hydroponic setup. So now you can see my plant went from this taller, thinner pot to this shorter, little bit wider container and a wider inner plastic pot, and it's ready to carry on its life in semi-hydroponics, as beautiful as it is. So this video was just to show you that you can grow your Aloe barbadensis miller in a semi-hydroponic setup or in soil as a house plant, and it would do fantastically for you, as well as in your garden and in places where they do well in nature. There's nothing better than seeing these kinds of plants in nature, and there are absolutely hundreds, if not thousands, of different types, varieties, cultivars and species of aloe plants out in the world. So it's just wonderful to have a little one of these in your home to enjoy this beautiful architectural plant with its lovely green coloration, its white splotches all over the leaves, its tags along the edge. This plant gets flowers. They usually get yellowish kind of flowers, and they are difficult to get to flower as a house plant. They need a lot of heat, a lot of light and perfect conditions with the watering and so forth to flower. But if you get to see one of these flower on their lovely long stalks with the lovely yellowish kind of flowers with an orangey tone sometimes and so forth, then they are really, really spectacular to see. And they could flower quite profusely in perfect conditions and every single year. But apart from that, in your home, you get to enjoy these beautiful leaves. Now, I've called this plant Medusa a couple of times today, and I've never thought about the name of this plant, but that's just come to me. So now this plant is called Medusa, and Medusa's going back up on my shelf. So all I have to say now is thank you very much once again for watching this video. Please remember to like, subscribe and hit the bell so you know when my next video will be coming up, and I will see you again very, very soon. Goodbye.